If your pictures are not good enough, you're not close enough. Robert Capa. We have to admit that we photographers are a curious bunch. Maybe not just photographers, but most creatives. When we hit a creative rut or become bored, some of us feel the need to change things up. This could mean switching cameras to allow for a new approach. Some denounce digital and go back to film, while others sell a kidney to buy a Leica. Now, admittedly, I've been involved in most, if not all, of these strategies. But this time around, I decided to be less dramatic and limit myself to one lens, the 35mm prime. As some of you may know, I bought my Leica M11 around this time last year, and when I purchased, I needed a lens. So I decided to go with the 50mm, thinking that this would be the lens for me. And if you want a more in-depth explanation behind my thoughts on the 50 versus the 35, be sure to check out the video I linked in the show notes and at the end of this video. As far as camera lenses go, we have so many choices. Heck, some people walk around with a bag holding a 24, a 50, and a 90. Albeit that's easier to do with M lenses because they're so portable. But I've got to the point where I'd rather carry a small kit. One lens, not a zoom. The 35mm prime is set to be the first lens that many photographers buy once they outgrow their kit lens. And maybe it's because it's a great lens that works for portraits, travel, outdoors, indoors. But when I'm out shooting, I mostly capture street scenes and portraits. Being fully manual, I needed a lens that allowed for a successful experience and inspired confidence. That being said, I found the 35 to be every bit the type of lens that allows you to capture the subject in relation to other things, as Joel Meyerowitz puts it. A viewer disagreed with me and commented that the 35mm was a lens that sat in the middle of nowhere. And that's okay. To each his own. What was your first prime lens? Mine was a 50 back in '97, so naturally when I had to buy a lens for my M11, I gravitated towards the 50. Outside of the necessary group shot at weddings, I rarely go below a 50 for my personal work. So sticking to a 35 for a full year was my way of stretching myself. This self-imposed commitment has helped me practice and fail in order to distill an understanding from every outing, all in an effort to compose the better wide frame. The way I see it, the wider the frame, the more mental energy it demands. The wider the frame, the more intentional you need to be with your composition. Otherwise, it could quickly look like chaos. Yet, embracing that chaos is part of the lesson. And with a lot of practice, you start layering and grouping and finding your way through the frame, using focal points and all the flavors of contrast that your brain can arrange at 1/500th of a second. Yet, even with the larger frame, I still managed to cut people's feet off, when that wasn't my intention. Mistakes like that let me know that I'm not quite done with the 35. Alan Schaller has a great tip to prevent this, one that I'll echo here. He keeps his eye on the silver mount of the camera body, and this allows him to keep square with his point of view, especially when shooting from the hip. I found it to be a brilliant idea and I thought I'd share. I've heard some say that sticking with one lens for too long will eventually become a crutch. But I disagree, because when you commit to one focal length, you really get to understand those frame lines. I've had comments where they expressed that once they found the 35, they really never took it off their cameras. And as I mentioned before in other videos, the versatility of a 35 comes from its ability to add context to your photos. I'm not on a 35 to get close. rather to see what a 35 will show me while standing at the same distance that I would a 50 or a 90. Kappa's quote and the need to get closer to your subject is polarizing to me. A photo is so much more than how close you can get to your subject. There is composition, light, depth of field, color, among other considerations. That being said, the best practice on a wide dictates that the wider you are, the shorter your distance to your subject, effectively placing you inside of the subject's world. Something that I'm not sure I achieved or care to emulate. But it's that kind of distinction that you can squeeze from this one lens only exercise. The enemy of art is the absence of limitation. Orson Welles. Looking back, I'm not sure that I've ever imposed this much restriction on my photography. And some could argue that my camera that shoots solely in black and white is a huge limiting factor. But to me, it's natural to have my camera shoot only in black and white. So I don't internalize it as a stretch or a limit. Now, using one lens for everything for a full year, that's a limit to me. It's a mindset thing. Every time I say limit, where does your mind go? A negative, right? No. Try to reframe it. Limits don't equal a negative. As Orson Welles' quote alludes, it equals a creative opportunity, if you will, a point of growth. Look, I know that more than not, I whizzed through life missing a few lessons. It wasn't until I was willing to slow down and sit to reflect that I learned and became a better person. In the case of this video, hopefully a better photographer, or at least that's the goal. All that to say, I see a path guided by my practice, my mistakes, to refine my approach to creating photos. For example, here's a shot that the old me would pass up. I would have an 85mm on me, and I would want to isolate the lady, making sure that I captured her face. But the current me with a 35mm, it accepts the scene for what it is, acknowledges the relationship between the lady and the mountain of boxes and her workday. I thought this was a perfect example of what I'm attempting to show in this video. Another benefit of the 35mm is that it allows me a fighting chance at acquiring focus when zoning. I can say with certainty that after this experience, I'm better at zone focusing, and I now think about my background more than before. Because of this one lens experience, I now look forward to incorporating my backgrounds into my photos. And that was hardly the case for me before. And I see that as a marked improvement. Now, as for this specific 35mm, I wanted a native lens, so there was that. Aside from that, the value to price for me is exceptional. I don't feel the need to shoot at 1.4. The 2.5 aperture on the Sumerit is plenty for me. And I'm open to anyone lending me the Summicron for a side-by-side comparison. In any event, I'm happy with the way this lens resolves details, and until I can prove myself otherwise, I'm sticking with it. So, where to from here? Well, I know that I want to go wider. My next move will probably be a 28mm for a full year. I've played with the idea of a zine for each. A zine for the 28, a 35, and ultimately the 50. As limiting as it may sound, I hope that I've shown how one lens has allowed me great creativity with less decision fatigue. There is freedom in limitations, and not just for photography, so I highly recommend it. Give it a try, see how you do. I hope you got something from the video, and if you found it interesting or remotely entertaining, consider giving it a like and maybe, possibly, subscribing. With your help, I'm trying to reach 2,000 subscribers by the end of May. But until my next video, let's keep creating.
I know you're a superstar, a supernova shining, you can see from super far. And they ain't ready, know you're about to hit the throttle on them. Won't see it coming, you gon' come through like a super